Hello and welcome back to Book and Trial and another video for the 12 Days of Christmas. Today I want to talk about A Christmas Carol. Now, A Christmas Carol is an iconic story and it's one that we see every single year. There are many different adaptations of it out there now, even with other twists out there such as like Ghost of Girlfriend's Past, which is a kind of romantic take on this story. But I want to talk about A Christmas Carol. So I decided to read A Christmas Carol for Christmas. And it actually took me a bit longer than it should have done because it is a very short story. It is a novella and it shouldn't be, it shouldn't take that long. But I haven't been reading as consistently as I would like to. So it took me a little longer than it should have been to read this book, but I managed to finish it, which I'm very happy about. And I rather enjoyed it. I noticed when I was reading it as well that there are actually scenes in here that you don't see in the adaptations, or at least in the adaptations that I have seen, I have never seen the moments in here. They're not big or anything like that, nothing major, but for example, two of the scenes that I noticed while reading it is, one was from when he has visions of the past. There was a scene where the woman who he ends up not marrying, spoiler alert, he doesn't end up marrying the woman, but the woman he ends up not marrying in the end, there was a scene dedicated to her, talking about her life and how her life kind of unfolded better for her, like she ends up having a family and everything, whilst he's quite miserable on his own. And another scene as well, it is a very, again a very short moment, a very, very brief moment, but you actually see Bob Cratchit actually go upstairs to see his dead child in a future future viewing. You actually see him go upstairs to see his child. Now I understand that if you see any adaptations such as like the Muppets version, they're not going to show a dead frog, really, they're not going to show a dead child. I know it's not the nicest of things, but death in the past wasn't as feared as it is nowadays. We're so fearful of death, but the fact of the matter is it was always around you. You just, it wasn't something that people didn't like it, didn't agree with it, but a lot of people, it was just something that was a part of life. It wasn't very hush-hush like it is nowadays. Especially in the Victorian era, Jesus, so it just kind of went beyond with the death thing in the Victorian era with the like death portraits and stuff like that, but that's a whole different conversation. A Christmas Carol is Charles Dickens, one of Charles Dickens' novellas, and it came out on the 19th of December 1843. Now it took Dickens all of 6 weeks to complete this story. They say he took a lot of influence from a variety of different scenes that he saw, similar to like when he wrote Oliver Twist. He took scenes from moments of his life that he saw, as is what normal for any author. But the inspiration for Tiny Tim, for example, was actually based on his nephew Harry, that unfortunately, even though he was a cripple himself growing up, he didn't survive, unlike Tiny Tim. Now, Charles Dickens, at the time of when he decided to write this story, he was in a bit of a slump, he was in a bit of like a writer's block situation because his other books weren't as popular as his first novel that came out. So for him to try and get into this mindset of writing a new story, he had to obviously try and block that out as much as possible. Like I said, it took him all 6 weeks to complete this little story, and it was a huge hit. Originally when the story went to his publishers, the publishers didn't think much of it, they thought the story was strange, and they didn't give Dickens the full amount of money that he deserved for this story. When it came to publishing it, even he himself ended up putting money in to get the story published. But the story itself was a huge success, a huge hit when it came out in December, and it is the iconic story of Christmas now. It's one of those stories that, like I said, there's been many different adaptations of it, and it's one of those stories that we, even today, still go back to watch over and over again. For Dickens, the success of this story even blew his mind. He was not expecting it just as much as anybody else. And then the publishers at the time told him, they sent him a letter on Christmas Eve explaining that it was in such high demand that they were going to have to do a reprint of this story. But after the story was published, he moved on to a different publishers because of their lack of faith in him, I suppose. One of the interesting things about A Christmas Carol, because it is meant to be a story, it's meant to kind of go in a sing-songy way. I didn't kind of pick up that when I was reading it myself, that kind of is meant to go in a sing-songy way. But if you read the story itself, at the beginning of each chapter, it says, it doesn't say chapter, it says stave 1, which stave is a wording that you would use in the music industry. But as this is meant to be a carol, a Christmas carol, a songy, short story, all about change and development and growth. So the story of A Christmas Carol is basically about Ebenezer Scrooge, who is this grumpy, very wealthy man who just hates everything. He hates people, he hates just everything. And on Christmas Eve he gets a visit from his past co-worker who had unfortunately died. So his dead co-worker comes and visits him, and he explains to him, you are going to be haunted by 3 ghosts, and listen to what they say. When I read the chapter when Marley comes to visit him, I was actually reading it at night time, and it did actually freak me out reading it. I was like, I should not be reading this in the dark. But even so, I still had to carry on, and it is a very nice story. Like I said, it's a very short story, it's very quick to read if you actually are committed to keep reading it. There's a lot of words in it that kind of over-fabricate what's meant to happen, but it's of the time, so I can't really question that at all. And it's one of my first Dickens that I read. So, after Marley is warned in, he gets visited by 3 ghosts. One is a ghost of Christmas past, one is a ghost of Christmas present, and one is a ghost of Christmas future. And by having all this time with each individual ghost, showing him what life is like, how he can change, or how his life has influenced him, he ends up becoming a better person at the end of it. He ends up wanting to help civilization, help give people money, and just help as much as humanly possible, to give himself, ultimately, for selfish reasons, ultimately really, so he doesn't live in the rest of his life, or the rest of his death, in damnation, basically. He doesn't want to be weighed down by the bad choices he made. But the interesting thing about A Christmas Carol, not only was this a success, and Charles Dickens himself actually did a lot of adaptations himself. He did a tour with the story, and he would actually perform the tour to people. He would tell people the story, and to be able to experience that is just, I cannot believe it. I would love to have been able to have that experience of an author who had written this wonderful story and that I loved, and was telling me his story in his own words on stage. That would have been friggin' amazing. And it was. A lot of people enjoyed that, and he actually managed to change people's ideas just from people watching his version, his adaptation of his own story. But the interesting thing about this is it's not the only story that does the whole negativity turn positive story. In 1957, a man called Dr. Seuss actually wrote a very rhymey, sing-songy story himself, which was How the Grinch Stole Christmas. This story is very similar to A Christmas Carol. It talks about the Grinch, who is a grumpy old person, well, not necessarily old, but he's grumpy and he's antisocial, and he lives near this village where they're all about Christmas, and it's all wonderful and it's great. And because he's so grumpy and doesn't like it and doesn't want Christmas, he decides, you know what, I'm going to ruin it for everybody. He takes everything away. He takes everything, literally everything away. The food, the decorations, the presents, everything. He takes it with the aim of getting rid of it. And then when he hears that the Who people are still singing and performing and still happy, even though they have nothing, it makes him realise that there's more to Christmas than the gifts and stuff. So that story comes from a more different approach to this one. This is mostly about class, and about how the working class need to just suffer because they are the working class, whereas I am the higher up class, I deserve everything. That's the kind of premise that A Christmas Carol has. But it is very interesting that both these stories are focused around Christmas. I mean, granted, A Christmas Carol actually came out at Christmas time. That was the plan. That's why it took him only 6 weeks. He was like, I'm going to make a Christmas book, and he did. He succeeded. But it's just one of those things that I was thinking about and going, why is it that we like these stories of these people who are horrible and then basically being changed into someone better, all because of the Christmas season and the meaning behind it? I feel there is a deeper meaning to this, a meaning that I seem to be not grasping, I don't fully understand, but we just seem to gravitate to these sort of stories, and it's fascinating because as much as Christmas is lovely and we do tend to be a lot kinder to one another, my question is, why can't we be like that throughout the year? Why does it have to just be at that one particular time? Is there a reason for that? And is there a reason why people like stories like this? Because there must be a reason why people like stories like this. And I want to know from you, what do you think the thought is behind that? Why do we like these stories of people who are seemingly so bad and then they turn good? And why do we like these stories, especially at Christmas time? I want to know your answers in the comments down below. I also want to know, have you read A Christmas Carol, and did you enjoy it? Did you not enjoy it? Have you watched any of the adaptations? Because I have seen a fair few. I have seen a fair few adaptations. Some of them I like, some of them not so much. Yeah, I want to know from you, what are your thoughts on the book? What are your thoughts on the adaptations, if you've seen any? And also, what is your thoughts on why we seem to like stories like A Christmas Carol and How the Grinch Stole Christmas? Why do we like those sorts of stories, especially around Christmas time? I want to know from you. Down below, let me know, and I will see you in another video very soon. Thank you for watching.